Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of my baseball interview series. My name is Jeremy Frank, and today I'm joined by Sarris of The Athletic. Thank you for joining us, or joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So my first question, for the people that are watching this that don't know who you are, just introduce yourself, where you're from, what you do for a living.
My name is Sarris, and
I botched it. I'm sorry. You told me how to say it, and I botched it.
That's all right. I get that all the time.
I'm sorry.
My name is Sarris. I write for The Athletic. I do some fantasy there, and I also report on technology, analytics, trends in the game from that perspective. I used to write at Fangraphs for a long time, and otherwise have written all over the internet, I guess.
So you do a lot more at The Athletic with like pitching and fantasy stuff. So why do you take that focus as opposed to a lot of people who just look at the game from like hitting and pitching? Like why are you more interested in pitching?
I mean, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, we're worse at projecting pitching. We're worse at doing pitching overall. And so why is kind of fascinating to me. Why do pitchers have wild swings and true talent? Why are we bad at projecting them? Why are we so bad at it? And so that kind of led me to kind of trying to uncover metrics for stuff and command, and trying to find the underlying quality of a pitcher. That was fascinating to me from kind of a numbers perspective, because hitting is, at least from a projection standpoint, it's pretty well sussed. And with StatCast, we're even getting better at that. But with pitching, we're still behind. So that's very fascinating to me. The other thing is, I grew up in Atlanta, and I was there from 86 to 95. So I think maybe some gears are clicking into place for people that know what happened in Atlanta that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a lot of really good pitching. And what was really fascinating to me was that not only were they good, but they were very different. I mean, Tom Glavine was the master of sort of extending the strike zone and pushing it further and further out. Greg Maddux was the control meister, but he had like a lot of really bendy pitches. I mean, he had really movement. He had like really, really great movement. And then there was John Smoltz, who in a way was a harbinger of modern baseball because he just threw really hard and threw a really hard slider, and struck a lot of people out. So just watching those three, and I got really lucky. A friend of mine sued the Braves at one point, and his reward for suing the Braves was a seat behind home plate. And so I got to see Glavine and even like Avery and all those guys. I got to see them from behind home plate. So that really opened my eyes to kind of the value of movement and velocity and what pitches look like. And I got to see a lot of great pitching.
That makes a lot of sense, because I do feel that we are way further behind in terms of pitching metrics, not just with projecting pitchers, but with also just evaluating them. And like you said, I feel like a lot of people have been looking for a metric that quantifies stuff or quantifies command rather than just looking at like the strikeout or walk numbers to try and guess how good like a player's like curveball is or how good they are at hitting the corners of the zone, because you can't really tell that. Whereas from hitters, you can get a pretty good idea of power just from looking at home run numbers. Like obviously it's not a perfect system, but it's much more of like a proxy for it than you could ever get for something like command or control or stuff for pitching. So growing up, have you always wanted to work in baseball? You did mention that you grew up watching Atlanta and their pitching. Was that always something that you wanted to do?
I wanted to be a creative writer growing up. I wanted to be a writer. Always wanted to be a writer. Baseball was really important to me for other reasons. My American stepfather and I bonded over baseball. When I came to America from Germany, baseball was a really easy way for me to bond with and make friends. So I remember playing a lot of like stickball or like wiffle ball, doing like the Julio Franco, and doing the Gary Sheffield, man. I was always Gary Sheffield and had that violent waggle. And and kind of doing the pitchers things too, like trying to be like the pitchers too. So just playing with the kids, like baseball is really important to me. It fell away from my life at different points in my life, and came back in and went away. But once I graduated college in around 2001, 2002, I started playing fantasy, and what happened was like the enthusiasm I had for baseball cards uh, in 2002 went right into fantasy baseball. And so that same ability that I had to kind of, I think, maybe look clearly and maybe look a little bit past fandom and just analyze players, I got to be pretty good at fantasy baseball pretty quickly. And that was my way into writing about baseball.
So you mentioned that you wanted to be a creative writer. So I know you write a lot for The Athletic now, but you also work a lot with numbers. So do you pride yourself more on the writing aspect of what you do, or like the mathematical or like computer science aspect of what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, it turns out that I'm not really great at any one thing.
That's
I'm
good,
not.
honestly.
I'm not really great at numbers based research, like statistical research. Like I do my best, and I think I've helped the community. Like I think I've furthered the community to some extent to what we've talked about and the different research we've done. But I'm not like amazing at databases. I'm not amazing at some of the underlying skills that it takes coding. I topped out at, I did do like multivariable calculus, but I didn't do much in college when it came to stats and numbers. So, but I do think that I'm decent at a lot of different things. So I'm decent at talking to players. I'm decent at interacting with people. So I'm decent at talking to the players. I'm decent at putting together a sentence. I'm decent at understanding the numbers. And so that's why I think I've come to this place where, I do a lot of pieces where I talk to the players about some piece of research. I bring in the research and I synthesize everything and I make it enjoyable and easy to read. Easy to read. So it's not that I'm like amazing at any one thing. I'm probably never going to win an award for my writing as writing. I'm not going to work for a team as like a statistical analyst. And maybe other people out there like Barbara Walters are going to do better interviews with people.
Yeah.
I've never gotten a player to cry or anything, but I'm good enough at each of those different things. I can put it together all right. So that's sort of the realization I think I've come to over time.
It's really interesting you mentioned that because I've talked to a couple people that work in front offices with more like the numbers aspect of the game, and they said that one of the most like important growing roles for a baseball team is someone that understands what's going on with the numbers, but can also communicate that to the coaches and players. Because no matter how like important the research you're doing is, if the coaches and players don't understand it or they don't think it's credible, then it's impossible to actually execute it in practice. So I think that's really interesting that you mentioned that it is important to be versatile. I know you didn't say it was like as good as, I mean, you said it was you'd well, I don't know if you'd rather be great at one thing, but you kind of said it like you weren't necessarily proud that you weren't great at one thing. But I think it is important to be well-rounded because it could help you when like it opens you up to a lot more things that you can do. Like you can be a writer, you can work for a baseball team, you can do fantasy baseball, which you do. But that is interesting that you
I mean,
say
I
that.
think
So,
if
go for it.
anybody's watching this and sort of looking for advice and thinking about their future career, a lot of times people tell you that you should find a niche and be really good at it. And that's the sort of idea of like be best at something. And it's a good idea. It works. Being best at something works. But I think you'll find that at the top of organizations, a lot of the times, you'll find people that are not the best at any one thing, but they are
Yeah.
good at sort of synthesizing. You'll also find, like in my career, I was once just like a fantasy baseball guy, and then I was just a fantasy pitching guy, and then I was like a pitching grips guy for a while,
Yeah, I remember that.
and like I still do those things. I still ask for pitching grips.
Yeah.
My phone is full of pitching grips. I was a beer guy for a while.
Yeah.
I'm a sandwich guy. So each of these things, I just do them. I like them. I'm okay at them. I'm not the best at them, but I just do them. And being more well-rounded, especially at a time like this, being well-rounded is useful because a lot of the one thing that you were best at is right now not very useful, or they stopped doing that. So
And a lot
like,
of times, let me add on to that. A lot of times, something that you're best at, there are so many people that are still better at it than you that it's impossible that like, oh, I'm only good at this one thing, but here are 20 Ivy League graduates that can do it a little bit better than me, and I don't have a job in baseball because those guys are better at it than I am. So I definitely agree with you there for sure.
yeah,
But
it's that was something that was said in my when I graduated high school. One of the things they said was a funny thing to hear when you're graduating high school and you think I can do anything. This guy said, "There's always somebody out there who does something better than you do."
yeah, that was
And he kind of meant it as like, find those people, work with those people, and that's one of the things I've done at the Athletic that the thing I'm most proud of are my collaborations where I work with really great writers like Trent Rosecrans and Andrew Baggerly and all these different guys, and like Jason Stark, and Ken Rosenthal. When I work with those guys, they make me better, and hopefully I bring some numbers and like bring some perspective to the story. And some of my best pieces have been collaborations at the Athletic. So, being able to collaborate with people, that's a skill. Being able to interact with people, that's a skill. And I think you're right. The people who've said that that's an important skill in baseball today, I have gotten more interest from baseball in terms of jobs in baseball, better offers, things that I think I could do. They've gotten better over time. At first, I was like, I'm never going to work in baseball. I just don't. It doesn't work. But now there's more of that sort of an emphasis on communication and how things fit together and how these people talk to these people and how we can better like develop our players. That actually has some juice to it for me. And there's been better conversations recently.
so is that something you want to move going into the forward? I'm sure that you enjoy your job at the Athletic, but do you see yourself in like 5 years working for a Major League Baseball team, or do you still enjoy the writing and would rather do that going forward?
5 years ago, I would have said 0% chance, and
Right.
that I would never work in baseball. And so now I won't say zero, and I don't know, like 30, 40%, maybe it's higher. But one thing that I really like about writing, it's very different. So when you get into a baseball team, it's all about winning. It's like
Right.
it's only about applying the knowledge to winning. That's it. There's nothing else. It's only applying the knowledge to winning. There's a bottom line. It's wins. And so there is a bottom line for me when I write. There's obviously a bottom line. Nobody can pretend that they only write for themselves. That's yeah, okay, good. Yeah. How do you have a job? Like, so
Right.
you do care about how many people read your stuff, and so reads and like whatever subscriptions, whatever it is, there's always some sort of bottom line. But you can get there so many different ways. You can do explorations, you can do historical stuff, you can do a sit-down interview with Joey Votto. You can, just you could just come up with an idea and like research it, and maybe nothing comes out of it. In a team, they'd be like, you just wasted 3 hours, or you wasted 3 weeks, or whatever. I could write about it, and still people would be like, "Whoa, it's really interesting that this didn't work out. I would have thought it did, or whatever it is." So I find it like one of the things I love about writing is just having a question and answering it. Like just thinking of something and finding out about it, researching it, and talking to people, and putting it all together. So you know, like there's a piece I've never written, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to write it. That's super interesting, and I keep talking to people about it, and I don't know if I'll ever write it. But somebody told me once that there are base paths that are 88 feet in Major League Baseball. 88 feet.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
but how do I just talk to people like how would I measure that? How do we do this? And I've talked
Right.
to all sorts of different people. I don't think I can ever write this story because I can't prove it. But that's such a great idea, right? That's such an
Yeah.
interesting idea.
So, going back to more of your background, did you study like a creative writing or a writing thing in college, or was it more of just a math or anything else? Because I'm trying to come up with a list of things that people in baseball study in college, because a lot of people ask me like, what should I major in college to get in baseball? And I'm like, there are so many different ways, so many different things you can study to get into baseball. So what was it for you?
I have degrees in I got like some minors and some majors, but I got creative writing, art history, psychology, and communications.
Wow, that is definitely very well rounded. Art history
Yeah.
specifically. Are you a big art person?
What's that?
Are you a big art person? I'm sure you are because you did art history.
I really liked abstract expressionism, some of the '60s art, some of the turn of the century modern art. I like art. I take my kids to the museums all the time. My wife was an artist. We buy art. Yeah, I love art. I love
do
art.
do
And
you consider what Darren Willman posts on his Twitter? Do you consider that art?
yeah, I do. I do. I think it's really beautiful. I think it's a lot of the stuff that he does is really beautiful, and I think he's one of the things that he's so great at is having an eye for how people interact with his stuff and how it looks and if the information comes across quickly and if it looks beautiful. So, yeah, that's a good question, but I think so.
So so in college or in high school, what was like a favorite class that you took? Since you do have a large like a very like a huge variety of things that I'm sure you took in high school or college or even before that. So what are some of your favorite things that you took like in a class?
Yeah, that was a really interesting question. You told me ahead of time, so I was trying to figure it out. And you know, some of the ones that came to mind were I really enjoyed. I took a creative writing class from Tobias Wolff, who wrote This Boy's Life, and that was amazing. I thought he was just a great teacher, and I learned a lot. Um, I took a class in Carl Jung in Jungian psychology that was kind of meaningful for just how I saw the world and how I saw the psyche. He may have been wrong about a lot of things, but I thought it was really interesting. But the number one class that I really enjoyed, I took a 10-week class on Blade Runner,
Huh.
and it was taught by the guy who there's these British Film Institute (BFI) has a book on like almost every movie, and the guy who taught the class had written the book on Blade Runner, and so we watched the original cut, we watched the director's cut, we read other Philip K. Dick novels, we watched other Philip K. Dick things, we read some comic books, we learned about uh, how it was influenced by how comic books look. We learned about sci-fi. We learned about Philip K. Dick. It was it was awesome.
That's awesome.
It was so good. That was such a good class. It inspired me so many different ways. I wrote a comic book after that class. I like got really into sci-fi. Just like I think Blade Runner Director's Cut is like one of my favorite movies of all time. So that was a really good class.
So it's funny because you're the fourth person I've had on this series. I believe you're the third that's actually mentioned a creative writing class as something that you enjoyed, which is funny because the people that I have are probably more into the math or data side of baseball. So I think it's interesting that those kind of people, like Dan Szymborski mentioned creative writing, and I believe Bailey from Foolish Baseball also said creative
Ah.
writing he enjoyed. So I think that's kind of funny. I know Foolish Baseball, I guess, is more of a YouTube creative writing person, although he does do numbers. But I thought that was interesting. So for things that you do with the Athletic, do you use like all public data or do you have access to stuff that's more private? Or are you not allowed to say?
Oh no, I mean people know that I sort of walked the line there a little bit. I got some stuff numbers from Driveline that I wasn't allowed to publish the whole data set. I was only allowed to kind of reference it and use it in my
Uh-huh.
research and my rankings. I use numbers from Stats Inc. They have a cool command number that I really like
Yeah.
for command. I'm not allowed to publish, every single thing that I get from them, but for subscribers on the Athletic, I'm allowed to do limited leaderboards and use that. So subscribers actually have more access there than some other places. What's also been cool is developing some contacts among analysts, and they won't tell you. It's so hard to get an analyst to tell you anything, but sometimes just from what they won't talk about or
Yeah.
when they shut up, like sometimes I've figured things out about my research and their research and where public research stands, with respect to private research. I talked to Jeremy Greenhouse, who works with the Cubs now. I talked to him about a stuff metric for baseball. I talked to him in like 2010 or 11 about having a stuff metric. So I kind of assume when I know things like that every team in baseball has like a movement and velocity stuff like a stuff metric basically.
So how far, going off of that, how far ahead do you think the private sector, or I guess Major League Baseball teams, how far ahead do you think they are of public research? Like the things that we're seeing now, like how many years ago were they doing that? If you had to guess from conversations you've had.
They had TrackMan 2 or 3 years before us, so I would assume that there's still an unevenness to this. Some people, when the TrackMan data came through, chose to take the TrackMan data raw, and chose to really dive into the exact numbers and do all the calibration and do it raw. And um, and, other people basically took the MLBAM, like the StatCast data that was cleaned and came through BAM, and used that instead. So, some of those teams are just using barrels like the rest of us, and max exit velocity and stuff like that. But other teams, I think, were a little bit ahead, and we're doing some more sophisticated modeling, and might be 2 or 3 years ahead on the StatCast type stuff. We're going to see that same decision now come through the line now that we're switching over to Hawkeye, which is
Yep.
an optical tracker. And now there's going to be 12 cameras everywhere. And now that's going to be an awesome amount of data, like so much data.
They have
And
like
so
player
some teams,
like body part data, right? That's what I've heard.
uh, and that's why, like, if you follow Andrew Perpetua on
I
Twitter,
do. He's amazing. I need to get him on here.
yeah,
He's so far ahead of everyone else that's
yeah,
posting about
and
anything.
and in fact, like, I think he's ahead of some teams, and like some teams, are like, I don't know, if we need you yet. We need to, like,
Right. Yeah. No,
maybe.
I've talked to him about that. He's so great at what he does.
but
It's
but
amazing.
that's what we're gonna do more of, is like turning people into kind of like stick figures, and being able to say that, like, these angles are better than these angles, and this predicts injury in this way, and like talk about things in 3D. So I think some teams, I'd say like 5 to 10 teams, are already working on that with Kinetrax, is a type of software or technology that has been doing that. But other teams were like, hey, I think we'll just use the Hawkeye data. But it's been fascinating to see who takes the raw Hawkeye data and adds all the server capacity and all the stuff they need to do in order to take all that data in. Who's going to add that and do it and take the raw data, or who's just going to take what sort of BAM concocts and use that?
That makes sense. So a lot of what you do, I would say, is kind of a mix between analytics and scouting, because I know with pitch grips specifically it's not an analytics thing really. I mean, you can see what those specific grips lead to in terms of numbers. And I know analytics is like more of like a buzzword than it is, but I think you get what I'm saying here. So do you think that the line between scouting and analytics is kind of blurring as of recently? I know a lot of people think that scouting is going to die. I don't think that's the case. I just think that, well, I would like to hear what you have to say on that.
Yeah, I think we've gotten better at tracking the things that scouts used to be better at tracking at. So, with Statcast, we got to directly measure things like how fast the player runs and how hard they hit the ball, and things that kind of used to be what you ask a scout, you know? So I can see why people think that maybe scouting is going to die, because now we can say, we don't have to ask a scout, did he hit the ball hard? We can just look at the
Right.
Statcast, and be like, oh, he hit it 98. So to some extent, that's going to be less valuable. But I think the soft science, the science of creating a culture in your clubhouse, the science of creating a good player development culture, of communicating well, and therefore, and having scouts that can see makeup and can understand, like a player a little bit psychologically, which sounds terrible to some people, but is still meaningful. I think it's still meaningful. Like, I had 2 children. One has a high motor and one has a low motor. And
Yeah.
like, the low motor dude, I love him to death. He's gonna be like an engineer or something. He reads like nobody. Like, he's gonna be fine, but he's not gonna be an athlete.
Yeah.
But the high motor kid, he just won't stop. Like, he is going, he will go and go and go and go and go till he gets what he wants. And that's the kind of thing that I think you still need to, like, look for, and you still need to scout for. So I don't think scouting can go away completely. I think that they still have a lot to do. I think that they're going to have to be careful. They have to know all. They have to be able to read all the Statcast stuff and incorporate that into what they do. but they also have to be like sort of judge character, I guess, and that's going to be important still.
That makes sense. So you mentioned that you grew up watching the Braves. So do you root for a team now? And if so, is that the Braves or is that another team?
There's this meme going around like where have I lived, and I've lived so many places. I'm born
I
in
saw that
Jamaica.
you posted that to Foolish Baseball, or he replied to you or something. That was
Yeah,
crazy that you've lived so many places.
yeah. I've lived in London, Germany. I grew up in Jamaica. I grew up all over the South, Mountain City, Georgia, Zebulon, Georgia. What up, Vero Beach? Like I've lived all over. And the thing that was interesting was I didn't have any money. Our family didn't have much money. We were running like kind of motels type situation. And we didn't buy the baseball package. And sometimes we didn't even have a good cable package. So whenever I moved somewhere, I became a fan of the team that was there. I
Okay.
was just like, why? Yeah, I still like the Braves or whatever, but like now I'm in Boston, so the Braves aren't on TV anymore here. The Braves were for a while, but I was, you go downstairs to the common area at your school, they're going to be putting the Red Sox on. They don't care if you want to watch the Braves,
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so I, this and it went hand in hand with like playing fantasy and being good at analyzing players and taking people's best cards in baseball card trading. I was always just kind of like, I'm a fan of the game. I'm a fan of learning about it. I'm a fan of the players. I'm a fan of certain players in certain places. And I had a more sort of fluid version of fandom. So I've been a fan of the Braves, the Red Sox. My dad moved out to San Francisco in like '88. The Giants. I moved to New York for almost 10 years, and I picked being a Mets fan. So I've been a fan of a lot of different teams. And at this point, you're right. I root for the story. I root for somebody I've written about to do great so I can reshare the story. Or
Yeah.
I sometimes root for players that that interact with well, and I try not to let that color my analysis. Um, but I'm human, so like the ones that I interact with, well, yeah, sometimes I will root for them.
That makes sense. So the last question I'll ask you, kind of going off that a little bit, your favorite baseball memory, whether that was something that you attended in person or something you watched on TV or listened to on the radio.
You know, as a kid, you do have more of that fandom, and I think that has that passion and that. So it's Sid Bream turning around third base. I think Francisco Cabrera, I think his name was our backup catcher. Yeah, it's like the NLCS or NLDS,
Uh-huh.
and he hits a ball in the outfield, and Sid Bream has two bad legs, and I think it's like the first year the Braves are good, like 90, 91, sometime in there, and Sid Bream, I remember being a kid like, no, he's gonna get thrown out, like no,
That's
yeah,
funny.
and he's just so old, and his knees are just terrible, and it seems to take forever because it did take forever. So that's one for me. But I also was here in San Francisco for Bonds, and
Oh wow. I wish I could see that. I was too young to know what was going on, but I wish I
that,
could have seen Bonds play in his prime.
yeah, that was a more general one where he did so many awesome things. Where it's just like God. But I do remember a series against the Braves. He had two big home runs in like the ninth and 10th innings to like win the series against the Braves. And my dad was just making fun of me the whole time, going,
That's funny.
and I was like, "Stop it, Dad! Bonds is awesome."
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a good rest of your weekend and more so a rest of your extended break without baseball, as hard as that may seem. But yeah, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I hope everyone's staying healthy and safe, and we
Yes.
get through this pretty easily. Stay home and stay home. We can get back out there sooner. So, thanks for having me on.